My dad lived in a farming area, and each house, or farm, was a few miles apart from each other. When my dad was about 14 years old, he was invited to a sleepover at his uncle's house. My dad liked this uncle, so we went over for the night. His uncle had a wife and 3 kids. Ages were 3 and 4 and a baby that was like 6 months old. They had a great time eating, chatting, playing with the kids, and then it was bedtime. My dad goes to sleep and wakes up to this huge noise. Then he hears screaming and something that sounded like a gunshot. He runs to his uncle's room and sees his uncle shooting the wife and the kids. My dad freaks out and runs away. He runs across the house and tries to jump through one of the doors, but he cannot open it because it was jammed for some reason. It was an old farmhouse, so it does make sense. So his only option was to run back to the other side and use the other door, which would mean he would need to cross his uncle's room again. He had no choice and slowly walks back and couldn't help but peek in the room. He sees his uncle standing there with a gun as my dad is staring at him. His uncle turns around and looks at him and says, "You're lucky I let you live," and puts the gun to his head. As my dad freaks out and starts running, he hears one more gunshot. My dad runs out of the house and keeps running down the dirt road, all the way back down to his own house. Lucky his dad was still up with some friends drinking and playing cards. My dad basically collapses as he makes it to the front porch and tells everyone what happened. They call the police and the police go to investigate, and they find everyone dead. A while later, my dad finds out that his uncle had quite a few mental issues and was supposed to be taking medication for it, which he wasn't. That is the reason he went crazy that night. As you can imagine, my dad was traumatized for a long time after and had nightmares of his uncle for a long time. So it is really not a less meat, as his uncle is no longer alive. Once again, I assure you, this story is true, and I can see my dad's eyes whenever he tells me this story. I wish I could have some sort of news article, but this was in the 70s and it was in Fiji, so there is no way I can find anything. It was summer of 2007. I was 16 at the time, and I had a bad habit of crawling out of my bedroom window and going for long walks in the middle of the night. I was pretty fearless by nature, but that summer, even I was getting nervous. There was a story going around of a guy in my neighborhood, not the best part of town, if you know what I mean, attacking a young woman. The tale went that he would find them on a bus stop or at a bus stop, follow them until they were alone, and then sexually assault them. I thought it was just a rumor that persisted all summer and seemed to grow more elaborate and wild rather than fading with time. On the second day of school, rumor became fact. The police communicated with our high school and held an assembly for all the female students. She told us that there was a man who was targeting young women, particularly petite girls, and that while no one had been raped, a few had been assaulted but managed to get away. She told us to be safe and to never walk alone, especially at night. I didn't listen. Like an irresponsible teenager, I continued with my late night adventures like I was invincible. At the time, my then best friend was dating a guy who really creeped me out. At the time, I was casually dating a less than stellar guy myself, so I really felt like I couldn't judge. But this guy was something else. Every time I had ever encountered or spoken with him, my internal radar went off. He seemed like an average, laid-back kind of guy. Maybe a little unmotivated, but an okay person. At the time, I couldn't figure out what it was that raised the red flags for me, but I suspect it was his body language, that subtle communication that can give away so much. My friend and I had been growing slowly apart through high school. When she invited me for a sleepover just after Halloween, I thought it'd be fun. We could watch a Disney movie and eat Timbits. It'd be great when I arrived. I was suddenly doubtful when I accepted the invitation. I didn't know that her boyfriend had moved temporarily into our house. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. Boyfriend was staying in the room beside my best friends. I thought it was a weird situation and I didn't really want to hang out around him, but I love my friend, so I stayed. Throughout the evening, the boyfriend would make little comments here and there, just inappropriate enough for me to shoot him a dirty look, but not bad enough for me to risk rocking the boat by calling him on it. Finally, my friend put her foot down when her boyfriend was carrying the TV into her room so we could watch a VHS. He suggested, jokingly, that we could have a threesome. My friend kicked him out of her room and told him to stop being gross. I was really on edge. I didn't like the way he was looking at me as he left. I was so lost in my own thoughts. I hardly remember the movie. The movie ended around midnight and my friend fell asleep before it was over. I turned off the television and flopped onto the mattress, but I couldn't sleep. A very strange thought was forming in my head. The guy stalking and assaulting women? His physical description matched this girl's boyfriend. The stalker guy's MO was to go after small young women. Both my friend and I were short and slim. I knew that boyfriend had been in my neighborhood around the time of the attacks. I had seen him at a bus stop once of my midnight walks. I told myself I was just being paranoid, and yet I couldn't drop the idea. After about an hour of lying in the dark, I was drifting off to sleep when I heard the door slowly begin to open. The room was set up with 2 mattresses on the floor. My friend on the one closest to the window. Mine so near to the door that if I reached out my leg, I could close it. The door only opened a crack before I reacted on instinct. I stretched out my leg and pushed against the door, quickly shutting it. My heart was beating so fast as my brain wired through the scenario. Was it a burglar? No, I hadn't heard anyone coming up the stairs. It has to be the boyfriend. I waited quietly for a moment to see if boyfriend would say anything or knock. Maybe he wanted the television back. He didn't say anything, just tried the door again and again. I scooched further down the mattress to put both of my feet against the door. It was as if he couldn't quite decide what he wanted to do. He would try the door once or twice, walk quietly back to his room, wait a minute, then come back to try the door again. The door had no lock, so I wasn't sure what to do. So I just kept doing what I was doing. Finally, after about 30 minutes of silently trying the door, he went back to his room. I didn't hear anything else after, so I think he fell asleep. For obvious reasons, I didn't sleep that night. I just kept my feet against the door and tried to figure out what I could say to my friend. I had somewhere to be early the next morning, and my ride came at 6, so when I snuck out, my friend was still asleep. I left a note for her to call me ASAP. Later in the day, I called the police, not an emergency line, and spoke to an officer. I told her that I didn't have a lot to go on, mostly intuition, but that I had a tip about the guy assaulting women in my neighborhood. The officer thanked me for the tip and ran me to stay safe. For once I listened. I didn't go on any nighttime walks for the next little while. Soon after, and before I got a chance to talk to my friend again, I think she may have been avoiding me, because I knew she was not around, but she never did call me. My friend's boyfriend was arrested. He had been the one after all, the guy sexually assaulting women. I guess the police were already suspicious of him, so when his DNA was matched to the last assault scene, he was caught. It was a terrible thing to go through, but my friend was really brave, and she even worked with the police to get justice for the victims. The boyfriend pleaded guilty to 6 counts of sexual assault and 3 counts of sexual assault causing bodily harm in May 2009. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and to be listed on the sex offender registration for 20 years. You can see 2 articles about him here. I'll link them in the description. I was 10 years old, just started 5th grade. I made a new friend in school, Jenny. My parents allowed me to go over for a sleepover at our house. They met our mom once. My mom and dad were pretty laid back because I was their last kid. My sisters were 9 and 13, older than me. So my mom dropped me off, said hello to Jenny's mom, and left. Me and Jenny started playing karaoke when our mom decided she was going to leave. She said goodbye to us, gave us kisses on the cheek. I remember thinking she smelled like black licorice. Me and Jenny were left to do whatever we wanted to do for the next 5 hours. Jenny's older sister came home around 1 a.m. and told us that we should go to bed because we're falling asleep on the couch. So we went into Jenny's room and laid in our bed. Later that night, I can't be sure what time because it was pitch black, Jenny's mom came home. I woke up to a pounding sound on Jenny's bedroom door. I started yelling in fear when I felt a hand over my mouth. It was Jenny telling me to be quiet and pretend to be asleep. But at that moment, it was too late. Her mom had kicked in the door, stormed over to the bed, and grabbed Jenny's face. She began screaming at Jenny because we accidentally left the TV on. I was trying to hide under the covers, but she saw me. She began slamming her fists on the bed around me and screamed, "Do you think you are better than me?" Over and over. I was sobbing and all I could think about was going home. I was so scared and I begged her to let me call my parents because I felt sick. Her mom grabbed my chin, looked me in the eyes, and "I know what you're doing, little girl, and you aren't going anywhere until I say you can." She stormed out of the room, slamming the half-broken bedroom door behind her. Jenny said nothing, and neither did I. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night. In the morning when I went to call my mom, Jenny's mom was on the phone. She wouldn't even let me use it, even though I asked multiple times. Finally, she was going to take a shower and I heard her pass off the phone to Jenny's sister. And she said, "Don't let that little bitch use this phone. If you do, I ain't buying you cigarettes anymore." I was a sheltered kid at the time, but when I overheard that, I knew I had to get out of there. I approached Jenny's sister and she basically threw the phone at me. She was ready to give it to me before I even asked for it. With a look of fear in her eyes, she said, "My mom is calling her guy, so you need to call your home now." And so I did. She saved my life, and I still believe to this day Was her guy someone who was going to get rid of me? I shuddered at the thought of it. The rest of the story isn't very exciting. My mom picked me up. I acted like nothing was wrong. 2 days later, it was Parents' Day in school. Janny was in my class, which meant her mom was there. Her mom approached me and asked me why I never wanted to come over anymore, and accused me of being a mean girl. She talked to me in a way that seemed harmless, therefore it wasn't obvious to my mom and my teacher. I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. Well, until 2 weeks later. My older sister was babysitting me while our parents were at the movies, and I broke down and told her what had happened, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. She comforted me. She told my parents. We hugged each other and we cried. A couple weeks later, Janny stopped coming to school. My classmates wondered what happened, and so did I. I didn't want to ask my parents what happened. 15 years later, I heard from Janny on Facebook. There was no life-changing conversations, but we exchanged a pleasant conversation. That's life sometimes.